I was sitting on my back deck in suburban Portland, Oregon, drinking my morning coffee when I noticed Patricia Henderson marching across my lawn with a clipboard and a scowl that could curdle milk. "Mr. Ashford," she called out before she was even within normal speaking distance. "We need to talk about that monstrosity you've erected on your property." I set down my coffee and tried not to sigh. Patricia was the president of our homeowners association, and in the 2 years since I'd moved into Meadowbrook Estates, she'd made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our HOA handbook with the enthusiasm of a medieval inquisitor. She was a woman in her early 50s with a platinum blonde bob that never moved in the wind and lips perpetually pursed in disapproval. "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I said. "What monstrosity are we talking about today?" She thrust a finger toward the back corner of my yard where I'd spent the last 3 weekends building a treehouse for my 8-year-old daughter, Emma. It was a solid construction, well made from quality lumber, complete with a small rope ladder and a slide. I'd been pretty proud of it. "That," she spat the word like it was poison, "is a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 4 of our HOA regulations. No outdoor structures may be erected without prior approval from the board. It's a treehouse, Patricia, for my daughter. I don't care if it's for the Pope himself." "Rules are rules, Derek." She flipped through pages on her clipboard with aggressive efficiency. "You have 72 hours to remove it or we'll be forced to fine you $500 per day until compliance is achieved." I felt my jaw tighten. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" She definitely did not. Furthermore, the structure is an eyesore that diminishes property values for the entire neighborhood. Several residents have already complained. Several residents. "Patricia, it's been finished for exactly 4 days. Who's complained?" she sniffed. "That's confidential information. But rest assured, the complaints are numerous and valid." She ripped a citation from her clipboard and thrust it at me. 72 hours, Mr. Ashford. I suggest you get started." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back across my lawn, her sensible pumps leaving little divots in the grass that I'd just reseeded last month. I looked at the citation in my hand, then back at the treehouse. Emma had been over the moon when I'd shown it to her. We'd painted the trim purple together, her favorite color. She'd already spent hours up there with her books and stuffed animals, creating elaborate stories about being a princess in a tower or a scientist in a space station. No way was I tearing it down. I went inside and dug out my copy of the HOA regulations. Sure enough, Section 7, Paragraph 4 did mention outdoor structures requiring approval. But as I read further, I found something interesting. The regulations specifically exempted children's play equipment, including but not limited to swing sets, sandboxes, and similar recreational structures not exceeding 12 feet in height and occupying less than 100 square feet of ground space. My treehouse was 10 feet tall and occupied maybe 60 square feet. It qualified as exempt. I called Patricia immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Derek, I hope you're calling to confirm you'll be in compliance." "Actually, I'm calling to inform you that my treehouse is exempt under the Children's Play Equipment Clause. Section 7, Paragraph 4, subsection C." There was a long pause. "That clause refers to ground-level equipment. It doesn't specify ground level anywhere in the text." The intent was clearly for ground-level equipment. "Then the regulation should say that," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "As written, my treehouse is compliant. We'll see about that." She hung up. 3 days later, I received a certified letter informing me that the HOA board had voted to reject my interpretation of the regulations, and that fines would begin accruing immediately. The letter was signed by all 5 board members, with Patricia's signature particularly large and flourished. I wasn't a litigious person by nature. I worked as a software engineer, lived a quiet life with my daughter after my wife Sarah had passed away from cancer 3 years ago, and generally tried to avoid conflict. But this was different. This was about Emma's happiness, and I'd already let her down too many times by being absent during Sarah's illness and the grief-stricken months that followed. I called a real estate attorney named Michelle Ross, whose office was in downtown Portland. She agreed to meet with me that Friday. Michelle's office was in one of those converted historic buildings near Pioneer Square. She was a sharp woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. "So, you're in a fight with your HOA," she said after I'd explained the situation. "Welcome to about 40% of my practice. Is it worth fighting?" "That depends. How much is that treehouse worth to you?" I thought about Emma's face when she'd first climbed up into it. The first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "A lot," Michelle nodded. "Then yes, it's worth fighting. From what you've described, you've got a solid case. The regulation as written clearly exempts your structure. They'd have to amend their rules to make it non-compliant, and that requires a vote of the full membership, not just the board. So what do we do? First, we respond formally to their letter, citing the specific exemption and demanding they rescind the fines. Second, we request a hearing before the board where you can present your case. They're required to grant that under Oregon HOA law. And third, we do a little homework. "What kind of homework?" she smiled. HOA presidents who are this aggressive about enforcement often have skeletons in their own closets. I'm going to recommend you hire a surveyor to verify your property lines. You'd be surprised how often people don't actually know where their property begins and ends. You think Patricia might be in violation of something? I think it's worth checking. People who live in glass houses and all that. I left her office feeling better than I had in days. Michelle drew up a formal response letter that I sent via certified mail the next day. I also called a surveying company called Pacific Northwest Land Services and scheduled them to come out the following week. In the meantime, Patricia escalated. She showed up at my door with her husband, Gary, a meek man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and informed me that the daily fines were now being assessed and would be placed as a lien on my property if not paid within 30 days. "This is harassment," I said. "This is enforcement," Patricia shot back. "You signed the HOA agreement when you purchased your property. You are bound by our rules. Rules that my treehouse doesn't violate. That's your opinion. The board disagrees. Then I'm requesting a formal hearing." Her eyes narrowed. "Fine. 2 weeks from today, 7 p.m. at the community center. Don't be late." The surveying team showed up on a Tuesday morning. There were 2 of them, a younger guy named Tom and an older supervisor named Bill. They had all sorts of equipment, GPS devices and measuring tools and stakes with little orange flags. "This should take most of the day," Bill explained. "We'll map your entire property line and compare it against the county records and the plat map from when the development was built." "Sounds good," I said. "I'll be working from home if you need anything." I set up my laptop on the deck and tried to focus on work, but I kept watching them move around the property. They started at the front corner, taking measurements and driving stakes, then worked their way around the sides. When they got to the back of my property, where it bordered the woods and the properties behind mine, they spent a long time in one particular area. Bill came up to the deck around 3 in the afternoon with a strange expression on his face. "Mr. Ashford, can you come take a look at something?" I followed him to the back corner of my property, near the treehouse but extending further to the right. There was a wooden fence there, old and weathered, that I'd always assumed marked the property line. "This fence," Bill said, "is not on your property line." "Okay, so it's a few feet off." "Not a few feet. About 40 feet. Your property line actually extends past this fence and includes a significant portion of what's currently the backyard of the house behind yours." I stared at him. "You're sure?" "Positive. The county records are clear, and they match the original plat from 1998 when this development was built. This fence was put up incorrectly, probably by a previous owner who didn't bother to survey properly. But according to every legal document we can find, you own everything from here to there." He pointed to a spot I could barely see through the trees, much further back than I'd ever imagined. "Whose house is that?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer. Bill checked his notes. "According to the county assessor, that's 4427 Maple Grove Drive. Owners are Patricia and Gary Henderson." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Bill looked at me like I might be having a breakdown, which maybe I was, but it was a good breakdown. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, I'm great. Can you document all of this?" "Photos, measurements, everything. That's our job. We'll have a full report for you in a few days." After they left, I walked through the woods to where Bill had indicated my property line actually ended. Sure enough, I emerged into a manicured backyard with a pool, an expensive patio set, and a built-in barbecue area. Patricia's backyard. And according to the survey, about 40% of it was actually mine. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the elaborate outdoor kitchen, the pool with its fancy tile work, the custom pergola, all on my property. Built without any HOA approval, I'd be willing to bet. I called Michelle immediately. "You're not going to believe this," I said. The surveyor's official report arrived 4 days later. It was thorough, professional, and absolutely clear. My property line extended 43 feet past where the fence currently stood, encompassing approximately 2,800 square feet of what Patricia and Gary had been using as their backyard. This included their pool, outdoor kitchen, pergola, storage shed, and most of their patio. Michelle reviewed the documents with barely concealed glee. "This is incredible. Do you know what this means? That Patricia's been using my land without permission. More than that. She's built permanent structures on your land without your permission. Structures that I guarantee she never got HOA approval for because, well, she's the HOA president and probably figured she didn't need to follow her own rules. What do I do with this information?" Michelle leaned back in her chair. "That's up to you. You have several options. 1, you could demand she remove everything from your property. 2, you could sue for compensation for years of unauthorized use. 3, you could negotiate some kind of easement or property line adjustment. Or 4, and this is my personal favorite, you could bring this up at your HOA hearing and watch her try to explain why her massive outdoor renovations didn't need approval but your daughter's treehouse does." I thought about it. I wasn't a vindictive person. But I was tired of being pushed around, and I was tired of Patricia's hypocrisy. "Let's go with option 4, I said. "But I want to do it right. What do I need to prepare?" Over the next week and a half, Michelle and I built our case. We compiled copies of the HOA regulations with the relevant exemptions highlighted. We organized the surveyor's report with photos and property line overlays. We even did some research at the county planning office and discovered that Patricia had never pulled permits for her pool or outdoor kitchen, which were both required under Oregon law. Emma asked me one night why I was spending so much time on paperwork. We were eating dinner, just the two of us like always, and she'd noticed the stacks of documents covering the dining room table. I'm making sure your treehouse can stay, I told her. Her eyes got wide. Someone wants to take it away. Mrs. Henderson from the HOA thinks it breaks the rules. But it doesn't, and I'm going to prove it. Mrs. Henderson is mean, Emma said matter-of-factly. She yelled at me once for riding my bike on the sidewalk. When did that happen? Last month. She said I was going too fast and being dangerous, but I was just riding normal. I made a mental note to add that to the list of reasons. Patricia needed to be removed from her position of petty power. The night of the HOA hearing arrived. The community center was a bland, single-story building at the entrance to our development. When I arrived at 6:45, the parking lot was already half full. Apparently word had gotten around that there was going to be drama. Michelle met me outside. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "Remember, stay calm. Present the facts. Don't let her bait you into losing your temper. We have all the ammunition we need." The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs for residents. I counted about 30 people in attendance, which was probably 10 times the usual turnout for these things. Patricia sat at the center of the board table, flanked by the other 4 members: Janet Morrison, Tim Chen, Robert Palmer, and Linda Shaw. They all looked uncomfortable except for Patricia, who radiated smug confidence. She called the meeting to order at precisely 7 p.m. "We have a full agenda tonight, so let's get started." First order of business is the appeal by Derek Ashford regarding the citation issued for his non-compliant outdoor structure. I stood up. Michelle had advised me to take control of the narrative early. "Thank you, Madam President. I'm here tonight because I believe the citation was issued in error. My daughter's treehouse fully complies with HOA regulations under the Children's Play Equipment Exemption in Section 7, Paragraph 4, Subsection C. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "We've been over this. That exemption was intended for ground-level equipment." "But it doesn't say that," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "The regulation as written exempts children's play equipment under 12 feet in height and occupying less than 100 square feet. My treehouse meets both criteria. If the board wanted to limit the exemption to ground-level equipment, the regulation should have been written to specify that." Tim Chen, a reasonable guy who I'd actually had pleasant conversations with at neighborhood barbecues, spoke up. "He's got a point, Patricia. The language is pretty clear." "The intent is what matters," Patricia insisted. Michelle stood up. "Actually, in HOA covenant interpretation, the language as written is what matters. Oregon courts have consistently held that HOA regulations must be enforced as written, not as the board wishes they were written. If the language is ambiguous, it's interpreted in favor of the homeowner. That's settled law." "And who are you?" Patricia demanded. "Michelle Ross, Mr. Ashford's attorney." A murmur went through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed. "You brought a lawyer to an HOA meeting." "You threatened to place a lien on my house," I said. "That seemed to warrant legal representation." Linda Shaw, an older woman who'd always struck me as fair-minded, leaned forward. "Patricia, maybe we should reconsider this. If the regulation as written exempts the treehouse, we might be on shaky legal ground." "We are not on shaky ground," Patricia snapped. "The regulation is clear to me." "With all due respect," Michelle said, "your interpretation doesn't supersede the actual text. Mr. Ashford's treehouse is compliant, and the fines should be rescinded immediately." "I disagree," Patricia said. "Does anyone else on the board have an opinion?" Robert Palmer, who I'd barely ever heard speak, cleared his throat. "I think we might be making a bigger deal out of this than necessary. It's a treehouse. For a kid. Maybe we should just let it go." "Absolutely not," Patricia said. We cannot have residents thinking they can build whatever they want on their properties without approval. It sets a terrible precedent. That was my opening. I glanced at Michelle, who gave me a small nod. Speaking of precedent, I said, I'm curious about the board's consistency in enforcing these regulations. Patricia's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I mean, if we're going to be strict about outdoor structures requiring approval, that should apply to everyone, correct, of course. So I'm sure you got board approval before you built your pool, outdoor kitchen, and pergola. The room went completely silent. Patricia's face went from flushed to pale in about 2 seconds. That's different, she finally said. How is it different? It's on my property, behind my house. It doesn't affect the neighborhood. I pulled out the surveyor's report. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. You see, I recently had my property surveyed, and it turns out that the fence line at the back of my property doesn't match the actual property line. So what? Patricia said, but her voice had gone up half an octave. So, it turns out that about 43 feet of what you've been using as your backyard is actually my property. Which means your pool, your outdoor kitchen, and your pergola are all on my land, built without my permission, and I'm guessing without HOA approval either. The murmur that went through the crowd this time was much louder. Someone in the back actually laughed. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. That's ridiculous, she managed. We've owned that house for 15 years. That's all our property. Not according to the county records, Michelle said, standing up again. We have a certified survey here that clearly shows the property line. We've also checked with the county planning office, and there's no record of you getting permits for any of those structures, which are required under Oregon law for pools and permanent outdoor construction. Tim Chen reached for the survey report. Can I see that? I handed it to him. He studied it for a long moment, then passed it to Linda. As they reviewed it, Patricia sat rigid in her chair, her jaw clenched so tight I thought she might crack a tooth. This looks legitimate, Tim finally said. Patricia, did you have a survey done when you built your pool? We didn't need one. The fence was clearly the property line. Fences don't determine property lines, Michelle said. Legal descriptions and surveys do. And according to both, Mr. Ashford owns a substantial portion of what you've been using as your yard. Janet Morrison, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Patricia, if this is true, you've built major structures on someone else's property without permission. That's a serious issue. It's not true, Patricia insisted, but she was losing the room. This is just a scheme to get out of his violation. My client has no violation, Michelle said firmly. His treehouse is fully compliant. Your structures, however, are not only on his property without permission, but they were also built without HOA approval, which is the very thing you're trying to fine him for. Robert Palmer shook his head. This is a mess, Patricia. I think you need to recuse yourself from this vote. I will not. You have a direct conflict of interest, Linda said. You can't vote on Derek's appeal when you're potentially in violation yourself. I am not in violation of anything, but the other board members were already conferring among themselves. After a brief discussion, Tim Chen spoke up. I move that we rescind the citation against Derek Ashford and all associated fines on the basis that his treehouse is compliant under the children's play equipment exemption. Second, Linda said immediately. All in favor? Tim asked. Wait, Patricia said. I haven't called for a vote. You're recused, Janet said quietly. I think Tim's right. You can't vote on this. All in favor? Tim repeated. 4 hands went up. Only Patricia stayed down, and she wasn't entitled to vote anyway. Motion passes, Tim said. Derek, your treehouse is fine. We apologize for the inconvenience. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders, but I wasn't done yet. Thank you. However, there's still the matter of the structures on my property. I'm going to need them removed or we'll need to negotiate some kind of arrangement. Patricia shot to her feet. You can't be serious. That pool cost $80,000. Then you should have made sure it was on your property before you built it, I said. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Patricia was shouting, several residents were asking questions all at once, and the other board members were trying to restore order. Michelle and I slipped out during the confusion. That went well, she said once we were outside. What happens now? Now she has a choice. She can negotiate with you to buy that portion of your property, or you can negotiate an easement that allows her to keep her structures there for a fee, or she can remove everything. Those are her options. And if she refuses to negotiate, then you can sue for trespass and force removal of the structures. But honestly, I don't think it'll come to that. Her husband seemed like a reasonable person. Once he understands the situation, he'll want to settle. Michelle was right. 2 days later, Gary Henderson called me. He sounded exhausted. Derek, we need to talk about this property line situation. I'm listening. Patricia's convinced your survey is wrong, but I had our own surveyor come out yesterday. He confirmed your findings. We've been building on your land. Yeah. Look, I know Patricia's been difficult. Between you and me, she gets a little overzealous about the HOA stuff, but we can't afford to tear down the pool and everything else. It would cost a fortune and our property value would tank. Is there any way we can work something out? I'd been thinking about this. I'd be willing to sell you that portion of the property for fair market value. We'd need to do a formal lot line adjustment through the county, but it's possible. What kind of number are we talking about? I'll have it appraised, but given the improvements you've made, probably around 60 or 70,000. He was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of property with a lot of expensive structures on it. Can we do payments? Talk to your bank about a home equity loan or refinancing. I'll need the money upfront, but how you finance it is up to you. Okay, let me talk to Patricia and our banker. Can you give us a week? Sure, but Gary, one more thing. Patricia needs to step down as HOA president. What? She's proven she can't enforce the rules fairly. She goes after people for minor things while ignoring her own major violations. She's made this neighborhood a worse place to live. If you want me to be reasonable about this property situation, she needs to resign from the board. Gary sighed. I'll talk to her. A week later, I received an email from Tim Chen. Patricia had submitted her resignation as HOA president, citing personal reasons. The board had voted Tim as the new president and had also voted to review and clarify all ambiguous regulations to prevent future disputes. 2 weeks after that, Gary and I met at a title company with our respective attorneys. The Hendersons had taken out a home equity loan to cover the purchase price, which an appraiser had set at $65,000. We signed all the paperwork. The lot line adjustment was filed with the county, and the check cleared. With that money, I set up a college fund for Emma and made some long overdue repairs to the house. The treehouse, of course, stayed exactly where it was, but the story didn't quite end there. About a month after the property sale, I was outside doing yard work when Linda Shaw stopped by. She'd brought a tin of homemade cookies. I wanted to apologize, she said. Several of us on the board knew Patricia was being too aggressive, but we never pushed back hard enough. You shouldn't have had to go through all that. It's okay, I said. It worked out. Still, I'm sorry, and I wanted you to know that we've made some changes. We're putting together a new committee to review all HOA enforcement procedures. We want to make sure we're being fair and reasonable going forward. That's good to hear. Also, Tim and I were talking, and we'd like you to consider joining the board. We have an open seat now that Patricia's gone, and we could use someone who actually understands the importance of reading the regulations carefully." I laughed. "I don't know. I'm not really a committee person. Think about it. We meet once a month, and it would help make sure this neighborhood stays the kind of place where kids can have tree houses." I promised to think about it, which I did. A few weeks later, I accepted the position. It wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but it turned out I had a knack for it. I helped rewrite several outdated regulations, started a neighborhood social committee that actually brought people together instead of driving them apart, and made sure that enforcement was fair and consistent. Emma loved that I was on the board. She'd tell her friends that her dad was important in the neighborhood, which always made me smile. The treehouse remained her favorite place, and I'd often find her up there reading or drawing, creating the kind of childhood memories I'd hoped to give her. As for Patricia, I rarely saw her after everything settled. She and Gary kept to themselves mostly. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd joined a book club and taken up gardening, which seemed like healthier outlets for her energy than harassing neighbors. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after the whole situation had resolved, I was at the community pool with Emma when Gary approached me. Patricia was sitting on a lounge chair on the other side of the pool, pretending to read a magazine but clearly watching us. "Derek, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure." We stepped away from the pool area. Gary looked uncomfortable. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" "For how you handled everything. You could have made it much worse. You could have sued us, forced us to tear everything down, made it into a huge legal battle. But you were fair. The price you charged was reasonable, and you gave us time to get the financing together. I'm not interested in ruining people's lives, Gary. I just wanted to keep my daughter's treehouse." "I know. And I wanted you to know that Patricia knows too. She won't admit it, but losing the HOA presidency was probably the best thing that could have happened to her. She was stressed all the time, angry about everything. She's better now." "We're better. I'm glad. And she wanted me to tell you, even though she'd never say it herself, that she's sorry for how she treated you and for being so unreasonable." I looked over at Patricia. She was still pretending to read her magazine, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Tell her I appreciate that," I said, "and tell her that we're good, no hard feelings." Gary smiled with relief. "Thanks, Derek, really." After he walked away, I rejoined Emma at the pool. She was playing with some other kids from the neighborhood, splashing and laughing. I watched her for a while, thinking about how different things could have been. If I hadn't stood up to Patricia, the treehouse would be gone. Emma would have been heartbroken. I would have been out thousands of dollars in fines. And Patricia would have continued her reign of HOA terror, making life miserable for everyone in the neighborhood. But because I'd fought back, because I'd done my homework and discovered the property line error, everything had changed. The treehouse stood. Patricia had stepped down. The HOA had reformed its practices. And the neighborhood was a genuinely nicer place to live. Sometimes standing up to bullies doesn't just help you. It helps everyone. That evening, after we got home from the pool, Emma asked if she could have a sleepover in the treehouse with her best friend Olivia. "It's still pretty cold at night," I said. "We'll bring sleeping bags." "Please, Dad. We've never done a treehouse sleepover before." I thought about it. The treehouse was solid, safe, and weather-tight. I'd built it well, and Emma's eyes were shining with excitement. "Okay," I said. "But I'm sleeping on the deck below with the baby monitor, and if it gets too cold, you're coming inside." "Deal." She ran off to call Olivia, and I smiled. This was what it was all about. Not property lines or HOA regulations or proving points. It was about giving my daughter a childhood full of adventure and joy, the kind of memories that would last long after the treehouse eventually came down. I went out to the deck and looked at the treehouse, purple trim glowing in the evening light. Behind it, through the trees, I could just make out the fence line that now correctly marked where my property ended and the Hendersons began. It had been a strange few months. I'd never imagined that building a simple treehouse would lead to discovering a property line error, going toe-to-toe with the HOA president, and ultimately changing the entire culture of our neighborhood association. But that's how life works sometimes. You make a stand for something small, and it ripples out in ways you never expected. The next morning, Tim Chen called me about an upcoming board meeting. We had to discuss a request from another resident who wanted to install solar panels. "What do the regulations say?" I asked. "They're silent on solar panels. The covenants were written in 1998, before solar was common." "Then I'd say we approve it. We can't restrict what isn't explicitly prohibited." That's what I was thinking too. It's nice having someone on the board who actually thinks about this stuff reasonably. After we hung up, I reflected on how much had changed. The old board, under Patricia's leadership, would have found some way to deny the solar panel request. They would have claimed it was an eyesore or that it set a bad precedent or some other nonsense. But the new board was different. We understood that our job was to maintain the neighborhood standards while respecting homeowners' rights, not to micromanage every aspect of people's lives. That weekend, Emma had her sleepover in the treehouse. I set up camp on the deck below with a thick sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee, and the baby monitor. The girls giggled and told stories late into the night, their voices drifting down through the treehouse floor. Around midnight, I heard Emma telling Olivia about how the treehouse had almost been taken away, but her dad had fought the mean HOA lady and won. "My dad's really brave," Emma said, and my heart swelled. "My mom says your dad is smart," Olivia replied. "She says he proved that Mrs. Henderson was a hypocrite." "What's a hypocrite?" "Someone who tells other people to follow rules but doesn't follow them herself." "Oh, yeah, my dad did prove that. He had a survey done and everything." I smiled in the darkness. Emma understood more than I'd given her credit for. She'd learned an important lesson about standing up for yourself and holding people accountable, even when they're in positions of authority. The next morning, I made the girls pancakes and listened to them chatter about their plans to have a treehouse club with some other kids from the neighborhood. Emma wanted to make membership cards and everything. "Can we paint a sign for the treehouse?" she asked. "Like a name for our club." "What name were you thinking?" "The Purple Tower Club, because of the purple trim." "I think that's perfect." We spent that afternoon painting a sign on a piece of wood from my garage. Emma designed it, sketching out the letters in purple paint with little stars and flowers around the edges. When it was dry, I helped her hang it on the front of the treehouse. She stood back and admired it with satisfaction. "Now it's official." "Now it's official," I agreed. Over the following months, the neighborhood continued to improve under the new board's leadership. We organized a spring cleanup day where residents worked together to beautify the common areas. We started a neighborhood watch program that was actually about looking out for each other, not spying and reporting violations. We even put together a summer block party that drew almost every family in the development. Patricia and Gary came to the block party, which surprised me. Patricia looked different, more relaxed. She'd let her hair grow out a bit and wasn't wearing her usual stern expression. "Nice party," she said to me as I was manning the grill. "Thanks. Good to see you both." "Derek, I owe you an apology, a real one, not secondhand." Through Gary, I paused, spatula in hand. "Okay. I was wrong about the treehouse. I was wrong about a lot of things. I let the HOA presidency go to my head, and I turned into someone I didn't like very much. You calling me out on the property line thing was embarrassing, but it was also a wake-up call I needed. I appreciate you saying that. Emma's treehouse is actually really nice. You did a good job building it. Thank you. She smiled, and it was genuine. Anyway, I just wanted to clear the air. Gary and I are happy with how things turned out, property line and all, and the neighborhood is better off with Tim running the HOA. After she walked away, Linda came over and raised her eyebrows. Did Patricia Henderson just apologize to you? She did. Miracles do happen. The summer passed pleasantly. Emma and her friends spent countless hours in the treehouse. The Purple Tower Club expanded to include 6 kids, and they created elaborate games and stories. Sometimes I'd hear them up there, narrating adventures about dragons or pirates or space explorers, and I'd think about how close I'd come to losing this. In August, the HOA held its annual meeting. It was the first one where members actually seemed happy to attend. We presented the changes we'd made to the regulations, all of which passed with overwhelming support. We also discussed the neighborhood's finances, which were healthy, and plans for some modest improvements to the playground and walking trails. At the end of the meeting, several residents thanked the board for making the neighborhood feel like a community again, instead of a dictatorship. Tim gave me a meaningful look when they said it, acknowledging that my fight with Patricia had been the catalyst for all these positive changes. Driving home that night, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I'd moved to Meadowbrook Estates 2 years ago, hoping to give Emma a stable home and a fresh start after losing her mother. I'd never expected to get into a battle with the HOA, discover a property line error, or end up on the board myself. But sometimes life takes you in unexpected directions, and you just have to roll with it. Emma was waiting up for me when I got home, even though it was past her bedtime. "How was the meeting?" she asked. "Good. Everyone's happy with how the neighborhood is going, because you fixed it. Because a lot of people worked together to make it better. But you started it by saving the treehouse." I pulled her into a hug. "I guess I did. You're a good dad." Those 4 words meant more to me than any victory over Patricia, any successful property negotiation, any praise from the neighbors. My daughter thought I was a good dad. After all the times I'd felt like I was failing her, especially in those dark months after Sarah died, hearing that made everything worthwhile. "You're a pretty great kid," I told her. "I know," she said with a grin, and we both laughed. The years that followed were good ones. Emma grew up with the treehouse as a constant in her life, a place of adventure and imagination. By the time she turned 12, she'd started using it more as a reading nook than a play space, but she still loved it. The HOA continued to function smoothly under reasonable leadership. Tim served as president for 3 years before passing the torch to Linda. I stayed on the board, finding that I actually enjoyed the work of maintaining the neighborhood in a way that respected people's rights and fostered community. Patricia and Gary became friendly acquaintances. We'd wave to each other, chat at neighborhood events, and occasionally share recommendations for contractors or restaurants. The property line dispute became something we could almost laugh about, the kind of story that gets told at parties with a shake of the head at how crazy things got for a while. When Emma turned 13, she asked if we could build a little addition to the treehouse, a covered deck area where she could hang out with friends. We designed it together, got it approved by the HOA without any issues, and spent a weekend building it. It turned out great, and Emma's friends loved it. One evening, as we were finishing up the deck, Emma said, "Remember when Mrs. Henderson tried to make us tear this down?" "I remember." "I'm glad you fought for it." "Me too, sweetheart. Mom would have been proud of you." My throat got tight. Emma rarely mentioned her mother these days, not because she'd forgotten her, but because the grief had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet appreciation for the time they'd had together. You think so? Yeah. Mom always said to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. That's what you did. I put my arm around her shoulders. Your mom was a smart woman, I know. I got her brains and your stubbornness, I laughed. That's a dangerous combination. That's what you always say. We sat on the new deck as the sun set, watching the sky turn orange and purple. The treehouse had been through a lot in the years since I'd built it. It had weathered storms, hosted countless adventures, been the site of club meetings and sleepovers and quiet reading afternoons. It had survived an HOA dispute and become a symbol of standing up against unreasonable authority. But more than anything, it was a gift I'd given my daughter. A place that was entirely hers, where she could be whatever she wanted to be, dream whatever she wanted to dream. That's what made the whole fight worthwhile. Looking back on everything, I realized that the property line discovery had been a stroke of incredible luck. If I hadn't hired that surveyor, if the property line had been correctly marked by the fence, I might have lost the fight with Patricia. The fines might have kept accruing until I had no choice but to tear down the treehouse or face a lien on my property. But the universe had provided a perfect piece of poetic justice. The HOA president who wanted to fine me for my daughter's play structure had been building on my land for 15 years without permission or proper permits. The hypocrisy had been so blatant, so perfectly ironic, that it had forced everyone to acknowledge how unreasonable the enforcement had become. And from that moment of conflict had come real change. The neighborhood was genuinely better because I'd stood up to Patricia. The regulations were clearer and more fairly applied. The board was more responsive to residents' concerns. People felt like they lived in a community instead of under the thumb of a petty dictator. All because I'd wanted to build my daughter a treehouse and refused to back down when told I couldn't. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories. Sometimes standing up for something simple and pure, like a child's happiness, can change everything around you. And sometimes the bully you're facing has vulnerabilities they don't even know about until you shine a light on them. I never regretted the fight, not for a single moment. Every time I saw Emma climb up into that treehouse, every time I heard her and her friends laughing up there, every time I walked past it and remembered what it represented, I knew I'd made the right choice. The treehouse stood for years after that, through Emma's teenage years and beyond. When she went off to college, she made me promise not to tear it down. "Maybe I'll have kids someday," she said, "and they should get to play in the same treehouse their mom did." So it stayed, a purple-trimmed monument to standing your ground, knowing your rights, and never backing down when you're in the right. And every time I looked at it, I smiled, remembering the look on Patricia Henderson's face when she realized her entire backyard pool setup was on my property. That's a memory I'll treasure forever.